So we're on Daf Pei Hey, and we began the sugya on the top of the Amud of Rav Sheshes on the second line, Bo Minei Rav Sheshes. And we're wondering whether or not a son could become a Shliach Bezdin, Lahalkos es Aviv Ulakalo, meaning Linadoso. And Rav Sheshes says, I don't understand. You're talking about a son. Why don't you even raise the question about anybody? How can anybody hit someone? That's a violation of Bal Tosiv. But the answer must be because Kvod Hayom Adiv. So let's apply the principle of Kvod Shemayim Adiv, and let's apply the principle of Kvod Shemayim Adiv to the son as well. Meisvei. So we're now up to Meisvei, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down from the top. And the Gemara now is going to raise a stira to Rav Sheshes from a brisa. The brisa darshans the poskar boim yakenu lo Yosef. So if a person is chayiv malchus in Bezdin, then you can't add an extra hakah. And from this, we're going to derive the iser of Pen Yosef, which means that you can't hit a person. Uma misha mitzuva lakoso mitzuva shalola koso misha ena mitzuva lakoso ena din shemitzuva lakoso. All right, so we don't know what that means, and the Gemara is going to now proceed to try to explain it. The Brisa here mentions two people. One is mitzvah lahakos, and the one is eno mitzvah. My love. Shouldn't we explain the brisa to mean idi ve'idi? Whether you call him misha mitzuva lakoso or misha ena mitzuva lakoso, b'makom mitzvah. We're talking about a case where he's obligated to receive lashes in Bezdin, and we should interpret this brisa as referring to two different categories of those who are chayav in hakah. Habibno. When it says Eina Mitzuva Lahakos, we're talking about a ben, that a ben is not obligated and included in the mitzvah to be Makeh Aviv. And if he's not included in the mitzvah, then for sure it's also because it comes under Makeh Aviv. And how much more so, Kal V'chomer, that he's not allowed to hit his father. And when it says mitzvah lakoso, be acher, that means when you're hitting someone who's not your father. In any event, the Kal V'chomer goes in the following direction. Acher is mitzvah olav lakoso. If he's not a son, then he has a mitzvah to hit someone, lashes in Bezdin, who's obligated to get malchus. And the Torah says in that case, lo Yosef. He's not allowed to add an extra lash. Now, in the case of a ben, he's not at all obligated to give malchus. So certainly, if in the case where his father is chayiv malchus, he, the son, is not allowed to mete out the punishment of malchus, how much more so that in a case where his father is not chayiv malchus, then for sure it's usher for him to hit his father. And that's the Kal V'chomer to establish that there's an isur lav of Makeh Aviv. So even though the Torah gave us already a punishment, and it says Makeh Aviv, you must, but we need an ashara. Where's the lav in the Torah for Makeh Aviv? And we're going to derive it from here and from Pen Yosef. This is the source for the Isra Hakas of it. But now it says in the Brisa that a ben is not mitzvah, lahakos is aviv, even when it's a mitzvah, when the father's chayiv malchus. So how could Rav Sheshes argue that a ben could become a shliach bezdin to mete out malchus to a father? It's against the Brisa. So therefore, Rav Sheshes has to reinterpret this brisa so they can reconcile it with his shita. Lo. It doesn't mean that Eino Mitzuva Lakoso is referring to a case of a ben, that a ben is not obligated to give malchus to his son, his father, if his father's chayv malchus. But idi ve'idi loshna b'no v'loshna acher. That whether you're talking about mitzvah lakoso or eno mitzvah lakoso, it makes no difference whether you're talking about a ben or you're talking about somebody else. And if there's a mitzvah lakoso, then that mitzvah is incumbent even on the ben vis-a-vis his father if the ben was established to be the shliach bezdin. Below kash. So what's the difference between the reisha and the seifa? The case of mitzuva shalol lakoso and the case of ena mitzuva lakoso. So Gemara says the following. When it says misha mitzuva lakoso, that's b'makom mitzvah. And when it says ena mitzuva lakoso, that's shalom b'makom mitzvah. V'hachik tani. This is the kal v'chomer of the brayso. Ma b'makom mitzvah shemitzuva lakoso. Mitzuva shalol lakoso, you can't give him more than the 39 lashes. And on that, the Torah says, Lo Yosef, Ishalom b'makom mitzvah. Right? If you're hitting someone who's a stam person and he's not chayv malchus, she'ena mitzuva lakoso. Eino din shemitzuva shalol lakoso. So this is going to be the source for the lav that prescribes someone from hitting another person, any other person, shalom b'makom mitzvah. However, if it's b'makom mitzvah, then there's no difference between an acher and a ben, like Rav Sheshes. Toshma, let's ask a kasha on Rav Sheshes from a different brayso. Hayotze lehareg, someone is being taken out for capital punishment. If the son hits his father or curses his father, then he's chayav. So again, even though generally speaking, a person who hits another person is chayav malchus for that, he violates the law of lo Yosef, but he's potter in the case of Yotze Lihare. And not only that, he doesn't incur any compensation, any payment for damages if he hits this person who's chayav misas bezdin, he's Yotze Lihare. But we asked the question on the brayso, Maishna b'no Maishna acher. If we're saying that an acher is potter when he hits someone who's Yotze Lihare, then why shouldn't that same p'tur apply to b'no? Rav Chizda, the distinction here in the brayso is between a case of misarvin. In other words, he refuses to go out to the place where he's going to be killed. And Eino Yotze, he refuses to go. And now we have to hit him in order to get him to show up at the place where he's going to be put to death. And in this case, in this scenario, if somebody else hits him, he's parted from malchus. He doesn't violate the law of lo Yosef because he's a shliach bezdin. He's aiding bezdin to move and relocate the person who's chayav misa from where he refuses, he's entrenched, and move him over to the place where he's going to be put to death. But a ben cannot become a shliach bezdin, and therefore, if he hits his father, he's going to be chayav. And this is a steer to Rav Sheshes, because we're now proving conclusively that a ben is not a shliach bezdin. So the Gemara answers, Rav Sheshes mokim le bi ein misarvin bolatzes. According to Rav Sheshes, the brayso is talking about a case of someone who's willing with his own feet, to come and show up where they're going to put him to death. So we don't have to beat him. He's moving on his own initiative. If his ben comes out and hits him, stam, that he's chayiv misa. But in a case where we have to force him to go out there, then his ben, like anyone else, could become a shliach beis din. It'll be potter for hakah. So the Gemara says, "Hochi." If the Bryce is talking about a case of someone who is willing to move and relocate on his own initiative, and ein tzorach al koso is acher nami. Why shouldn't someone else who hits him unnecessarily be in violation of Bal Yosef and be chayiv in tashlumin for any damages incurred? Because his hakos is called hakos shelo b'makom mitzvah, it's hakos stam. That's called chovil b'chavero. Why does the Bryce establish he's potter if it's addressing a case of eino tzorech al kosa? And the Gemara says gavra ketila, who the moment that this person was condemned to death, he's called a gavra ketila. And what happens is that a chovil b'chavero, we assess the compensation based on how much this person who is victimized could be worth in the shuk. But in the case of a person who's a gavra ketila, then you don't pay any compensation for haka'asa because he has no value in the shuk. Ein lo erech klal. But beno, if his ben hits him, then he cannot be potter midin gavra ketila because of the following logic. Now here we have a quote of Rashi. Rashi is not here, it's later on. But the Masechet quotes Rashi here. So we're trying to figure out why is it that if an acher hits a gavra ketila who's condemned to die, he's potter, but if a ben hits his father, who's a gavra ketila, he's chayiv. So he says the following: Aval ben sheiko eno niftar mitam she'ovu gavra ketila. Why? Kevet shemakeh Aviv leachar moso otu. So what does it mean? A son is chayav for making a chabura and wounding his father's body. And even if his father is now considered a gavra ketila, there still is a chabura. I mean, the blood is still circulating throughout the body, although legally he's a gavra ketila, but the mitzias, the biological fact of life, is that he is alive and he has blood circulating. When the ben hits him and removes his blood, that's called a chabura. And he's chayiv misa for that. So gavra ketila, it seems, is only a mitigating circumstance with regard to tashlumei nezek of chovel b'chavera. But I'm just wondering, does he violate the law? Let's just see. It seems like he's potter also for the lav. I'm trying to figure out why is he potter from the law. So at least I have Misery Loves Company here. At the end of footnote Tet Zayin, he says, Adayin yesh lahakshos, loma niftar ha-makeh me'amalkis, shenischayev b'hem b'masha overall isur chovel b'chavero. So he tells me to be patient. So again, according to Rav Sheshes, we're talking about a case of a gavra ketila, and the makeh is potter, unless he's beno. If he's beno, then he's chayav mishum chabura, despite the fact that his father is a gavra ketila. So the Gemara asks for Amar Rav Sheshes, bisho yoshein v'meis chayav. If you humiliate someone who is asleep, and how much more so in the case of mess where he's dead, l'chora, that's not boshes. Nevertheless, even though the victim will not be embarrassed, you're still chayav. The Mavayish has to pay the Yarshim for humiliating their father, even though the father is already gone. No, it works like this. The victim of this boshes went to sleep, and then there was a Maisa Mavayish, and then the victim died in his sleep. So he never really experienced his boshes. Why? Because before he woke up to find out about his boshes, he died. But nevertheless, we're going to say that even though he didn't feel an experience of boshes, you have to pay for that. Because you did an action of chavola that generates boshes. So the Gemara is asking the following question. Why then, in the case of Makeh Gavra Ketila, meaning Makeh is someone who's already been condemned to death, is he potter from Tashlumin as a chovel, he should be paying the Arshin. So mind you, the Gemara is not yet ready to ask my question from before. Why is he put from Malchus for hitting the Mechuyev Misa, the Yotzei Hareg, who's a Gavra Ketila? The Gemara doesn't understand why he's put from Tashlumei Mammon, which he should be paying to the Yarshin. So Gavra Ketila, the Gemara understands, would not in any way undermine the Chiyuv Chaval. Just like in the case of Boshes, where if Sheshes says you have to pay Boshes to the Yarshim, even though the victim of your Chavola did not experience the Boshes, but we look at the physical reality of the Chavola, and here too, despite the status of Gavra Ketila, the physical act of Chavola registers and generates a chiyuv of tashlumi chavola, which is going to be paid to the Yarshim. So Gemara answers, Hachamay askinon, b'shiko hako she'ein bo shava pruta. There's no chiv tashlumin for a nezek that's less than a shava pruta. If there was a hakov shava pruta, you would have to pay, and the money would go to the yarshim. So the Gemara asks, how can you say that the Bryce is talking about a case of ein ba hakosh of a pruta? V'amar Rav Ami Rav Yochanan, hiko hakosh ein ba shav pruta loke. The Bryce says he's potter, and the implication is he's potter both for tashlumin, which I understand because it's hakosh ein ba shav pruta, but even for malchus, if he's not chayav mamon, because the hakol is ein ba shav pruta, then he gets malchus for violating the law of Pal Yosef. So we have a principle eino mishalim v'loke, but in a case where there's no tashlumin, then we go back to the position, the original point of chiyuv malchus. So Gemara answers, my potter the kamar potter mi mamon. When the Brisa says he's potter, he's only potter mi mamon because it was hakosh ein ba shav pruta. But as far as malchus is concerned, he violates the law of Pen Yosef and he gets malchus. So now we have to ask the question, the Brisa contrasts the case of Acher with the case of Beno. It says, Hayotzi li hareg, uba Beno v'kol v'kilo chayev, ba Acher v'kol v'kilo potter. And now it's saying that even in the case of Acher is chayev, he's potter only from Mama. And why? Because it was hakosh ein ba shav pruta. So in what sense is Beno chayav? How could the Ben be chayav if it's a pachos v'shav pruta? There's no mama. The Gemara's language is michlal to Beno chayav b'mamon. And that's impossible because it's hakosh ein ba shav pruta. Elevadai. So we have no choice, but we have to interpret the Brisa in the case of Beno chayev, shu chayev b'dina, which means he's chayev misa. Is hochinami. We should say the same logic should apply to Acher. And potter means he's potter mi mama because it's a hakosh ein ba shav pruta, but then we're going to have to say that Acher is potter b'dina, which means he's chayav malchus for the violation of Pen Yosef. So again, we don't understand the difference between Ben and Acher. Because if it's Pachs Mishav Pruta, then in both cases there's a Ptur of Mama. But in both cases there should be a Chayav B'dina. So why is it that Acher is Potter and Beno is Chayav? So again, at this point, we have to go back to Rav Chizda's distinction. That we're talking about a case where he refused to go out to be killed, and the Ben is chayav because he cannot become a shliach bezdin for this, and that's against Rav Sheshes. So let's go back to the original interpretation of Rav Chizda, and the Bryce is talking about a case of ein misarvim bo lotzes. So 1 second. Okay, so if it's ein misarvim bolotes, then no one could be a shliach bezdin here because he's willing on his own initiative to walk to the gallows, so to speak. So why is it that acher is potur? Ela acher hainu time b'de potur, not because of gavra ketila, because that would certainly apply to beno as well, but rather the Omar Krov and Osi B'amchalo Sa'ar, which is the violation in Parshas Mishpatim of Klola. And B'amcha is B'ose Maisa Amcha, someone who observes the dinim of the Torah. So if you makal someone who observes the laws of the Torah, then you violate a lav of Benosi Miamcha Losar. But in the case of a person who's Yotze Lihareg, so he's not considered Ose Maisa Amcha, and therefore there's no Iser Klola. And he's not considered part of Amcha. And therefore you're potur al Kilulasa. So we don't know why a ben would be chayev. That's going to come up later in the Gemara. But the Gemara says, "Atena klola." You can explain why you're potter for being makal yotzi liyoreg because it's not bi'amcha avol haka minolan, and the answer is makshina naka leklol. So Gemara asks, "Hachi beno nami." Why should his ben be chayev for klol and haka? After all, a Yotze Lihare is not considered Amcha. And the Gemara answers, Kid Rabbi Pinchas. The Asa Tshuva. All right, now this Rabbi Pinchas is in Masechet Chagigah Chavav with regard to the Mishnah of a Ganav. And he interprets the Mishnah as referring to someone who did Tshuva. And if we apply that interpretation here to the Brisa, that the Yotze Lihareg did Tshuva, and therefore he's back to Amcha. So again, we have the problem, okay, we understand why the Ben is Chayev, but why is someone else Potter? Yihachi Acher Nami. Acher also should be Chayev now, B'Torah Maisa Amcha, also Maisa Amcha. Amarav Mori, the pasuk says "V'nasi b'yamcha lo sa'ar." With regard to Iser Klola, is b'mekuyam shebe'amcha. And what's mekuyam shebe'amcha? It's someone who deserves to live, but someone who's nigmar dina leharek, he's not roy liskayim. He's not included in Mekuyam Sheba'amcha. And therefore you're not chayev for Kilulasa. Yeah, but again, Ihachi B'no Nami. So the same exclusion in the case of a Yotze Lihare should apply to B'no. And then if you're going to say it's Chazer B'tshuva, and therefore he's royal as Kaim, that's not really applicable because we're going to have to put him to death. And not only that, if that would be the reason why the Ben is Chayiv, then we should apply that to Acher. So here we turn to the Peheim and Beis, meaning the Havi Liacham Misa. It's like a case of someone who's being Makal Aviv Liacham Misa. And the Mishnah later on is going to establish that Hamakalel Aviv Liacham Misa, you'll see it about 8 or 9 lines down for the top of the Yomid in the Mishnah, he's Chayav. So even though the Yotze Lihareg is Eino Royalist Kayim, that's only to be Mechayev the Ben. The Ben is Chayav al Kilulaso because there's a separate halach in Ben that he's Chayav for Kilulas Aviv Liacham Misas Aviv. And we're going to make an equation between Haka and Klola. So Makeh Aviv Hayotze Liharg is Chayav, and Makal Yachar Misa is Chayav, but Makal Yachar Misa is Potter. And that's because he's Eino Ose Bo Chabura. Now, what about Acher? So an Acher doesn't have a halacha of Makal Yachar Misa. Makal Yachar Misa is a specific, unique halacha, a chiyuv in Bno L'gabi Aviv. It does not apply to anyone else. So since we're saying that Yotze Liharig has a similar status to Liachar Misa, he's not a Mekuyam Bi'amcha, so therefore there's no Isa Klola, unless there would be an Isa Klola Liachar Misa, which only applies in the case of Ben L'gabi Aviv. My Havi Allah, what's the final conclusion? La halacha from this entire sugya. Can a ben become a shliach bezdin to his father? And Rabbah would allow it. I'm sorry, Rav Sheshis would allow it. Amar Rav Arfuna v'chein tana debei Rav Yishmael lakol ein haben nasa shliach liov lakoso ulal koso. Lakol means no matter what Avera the father violated, and he's chayiv what? Malchus in Bezdin, but nevertheless the ben cannot be a shliach to mete out the punishment of Melch. So we reject Rav Sheshis. Chutz mimesis, with the case of a father who influenced others to worship Avodah Zarah, then Harei Torah, the ben can become a shliach vis-a-vis his father. Shoyomer Torah, the Torah says in the parasha of Mesis, v'lo sachmo, v'lo sechase olam. And that lav of lo sachmo applies even to a ben. Wow. Different halacha in Mesis. And he quotes him in Chaskinuchi in footnote number Gimel that the ben becomes a shliach to kill his father for mesis, even if the mesis does tshuva. However, the Minchas Chinuch has a radical possibility in this Gemara that the Gemara has in mind of shehesis as beno. If the father was mesis acherim and he did tshuva, then the ben is not allowed to hit his father, and if he does so, he's chayiv misa. And the lav, according to the Minchas Chinuch of Lo Sachmo, only applies to the Musas himself, but not to anybody else. Okay, and this leads us to the Mishnah here on the top of Pei Heyom and Beis, which in Mirza Hashem will pick up tomorrow at about 11:45. Okay, then? So let me take this opportunity to wish you a great day. Thank you so much.